Have you ever asked yourself what would change if I stopped letting fear make my decisions and followed my soul guidance fully? It's one of those questions that sounds inspiring on the surface, but most people think I'd be happier, I'd be more fulfilled, I'd become finally who I'm meant to be. Maybe that's true, but I think most people underestimate what would actually change. Because following soul guidance isn't just about gaining something, it's also about letting things go. It's about becoming someone different. And that part is often where people get stuck. Welcome or welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today, I want to explore this question honestly, not from a fantasy perspective, not from the spiritual bypass perspective, but from a practical, real world perspective. Because if you truly follow your soul guidance, your life would almost certainly change. The question is, are you prepared for what those changes might be? Now, imagine you're driving somewhere you've never been before. Your soul is the GPS, your fear is the backseat driver. The GPS can see the entire route. It knows where you're going, it knows which turns to take, it knows what lies beyond the next corner. But the backseat driver sees none of that. The backseat driver only sees what's directly in front of the car. And it's nervous. It keeps talking. What if we're going the wrong way? That road looks risky. Maybe we should turn around. Maybe we should wait until we know more. Maybe we should go back to where we started. Sound familiar? For many people, fear has become so loud that they mistake it for wisdom. But fear and intuition don't speak the same language. Fear focuses on danger, soul guidance focuses on direction. Fear asks, how can I avoid discomfort? The soul will ask, where am I being called to grow? The goal isn't to eliminate fear. The goal is deciding who gets the steering wheel. Now, most people think fear is stopping them from moving forward, and sometimes that's true. But often fear is protecting something else. Fear is protecting an identity, the version of you that has learned how to stay safe, how to survive. The version that knows how to fit in, the version that avoids rejection, the version that keeps everyone else comfortable, the version that doesn't take too many risks, that stays predictable. The problem is that your soul didn't come here simply to survive. You wouldn't be watching this video if you were one of those people. Your soul came here to evolve, and growth often requires leaving familiar territory. That is where the conflict begins, because the soul is asking for expansion while the ego is asking for guarantees. And life rarely provides both at the same time. Now, this is where things become real. If I fully follow my soul's guidance, what would actually change? The answer may not be what most people expect. You might leave relationships that no longer align. Not because anyone is bad, not because anyone has done anything wrong, but because you've outgrown. You're beyond that dynamic. You might stop people pleasing, which sounds empowering until people start reacting to the new version of you. You might stop saying yes when you really mean no. You might speak truths you've been avoiding. You might finally stop shrinking yourself to make other people comfortable. You might become more visible. You might share your ideas, start that business, write that book, launch that project, teach that workshop, have the conversation, apply for the opportunity, and take the steps you've been postponing. You might just stop waiting for permission, and that can be confronting and uncomfortable for other people, because many people are not afraid of failure. They're afraid of being seen. They're afraid of being responsible for their own potential. Now, one of the biggest traps I see people is waiting for certainty. They want confirmation, evidence, guarantees, a sign, then another sign, then another sign just to be sure. And while they're waiting, life keeps moving. Soul guidance rarely arrives with a complete blueprint. More often, it arrives as that little nudge, a feeling, a knowing, an idea that won't leave you alone, a direction that keeps appearing. The challenge is that intuition usually illuminates the next step, not the entire staircase. Fear will say, show me the whole plan first. Soul will say, take the next step. And that's where trust is built. Not before action, through action. Now, what happens in the body is something many spiritual conversations overlook. Following soul guidance isn't just a spiritual process, it's a nervous system process. When you move beyond what's familiar, your body reacts. Even when the change is positive, you can feel anxious, uncertain, activated, emotional, vulnerable, not because you're making the wrong decisions, but because you're moving beyond the known. Your nervous system is wired to prefer familiarity, even if the familiar isn't serving you. That's why people often mistake comfort for danger. But discomfort and danger are not the same thing. Growth often feels uncomfortable. Expansion often feels uncomfortable. Becoming a new version of yourself often feels uncomfortable. The question becomes, can I remain present while my system adjusts to a bigger life? Most people assume that following soul guidance means life becomes easier. Now, I don't think that's the real reward or necessarily completely true. Life will still have challenges. You'll still face the uncertainties. You are still going to make mistakes. You're still going to encounter obstacles. The difference is something much deeper. You experience less inner conflict. You stop arguing with yourself. You stop knowing what needs to happen while continually avoiding it. You stop asking for guidance and then ignoring the answer. You stop betraying your own knowing. And that changes everything. Because internal conflict is exhausting. It drains energy, it creates frustration, it creates self-doubt, it creates stagnation. Now, every time you ignore your deeper knowing, a part of you will notice. Every time you override your intuition, a part of you notices. Over time, trust in yourself weakens, not because your intuition stops speaking, but because you stopped listening. Most people will ask, what if I follow my soul guidance and it goes wrong? That is a fair question, but here's another one that deserves equal attention and usually gets avoided. What if you don't? What if you spend the next 5 years doing exactly what you're doing now? What if you keep choosing safety over growth, comfort over expansion, familiarity over possibility? What would that cost you? Not financially, not externally, but internally. Who might you become if you continue ignoring what you already know? What opportunities might pass you by? What experiences might never happen? What parts of yourself might remain dormant? Sometimes the greatest risk isn't moving forward. Sometimes the greatest risk is staying exactly where you are. If I let go of fear and follow soul guidance fully, my life wouldn't become perfect, but it would become more aligned. I would stop wasting energy fighting myself. I would stop waiting for certainty that may never arrive. I would stop asking for guidance while secretly hoping the answer requires no change. I would become someone who trusts themselves enough to take that next step, not because fear has disappeared, but because fear is no longer in charge. And perhaps that's the real invitation, not to become fearless, but to stop giving fear the authority to decide the direction of your life. Because your soul doesn't need you to have all of the answers. It doesn't need perfection. It doesn't need certainty. It simply needs your willingness to take the next step when the path reveals itself. And that one step may change far more than you imagine. So I'd love to see some comments. Thank you for being here today. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos, and I'll catch you on the next one.